Another IELTS writing lesson. This is for part 2 of IELTS writing, which I believe is the same for academic and general IELTS. Now, you often write a for and against essay for this part. I think it's 250 words long and 40 minutes time you have to do it, so that's not long. Now, I'm just going to say some general points about this exam. Firstly, it's an exam of balance, which should be obvious from the for and against. So really, you want to be giving arguments on both sides of the debate. Now, this may mean that you have to play devil's advocate. What I mean is, you may have to argue in favour of something which you are against, or something which you don't believe, in which case you might want to use some of these impersonal expressions. But you really should try and make this a balanced essay. That will get you the marks which you want. So you're going to have to talk about advantages and disadvantages, benefits and drawbacks, pluses and minuses. The actual structure of the for and against essay should really be composed from 3 parts: introduction, main body and conclusion. Now, the introduction and the conclusion, in my opinion, they're easier once you've already decided on the main body. And the main body should just be 2 to 4 paragraphs, really. It's up to you. And they should be reason or reasons for the whatever question you have, and reasons against whatever question you have. So I think this is easier to see if you have an example. A very typical question for this part is technology, for example, the pluses and minuses of technology, but it's usually a little bit more focused, so it will be on something like technology in education. Is technology a benefit for education, or is it a drawback for education? What are the advantages and disadvantages of using technology to learn something? Now, if I were writing such an essay, I would think about the main body first. I would think about the pluses of using technology, perhaps in the classroom or perhaps not, because if that's not in the question, you could talk about lots of different ways of learning. So if I was going to talk about some of the pluses of technology, I would say nowadays you can learn in a lot of different environments. It's very convenient thanks to technology. Thanks to the internet, you can have a lesson whenever you want at a time which is good for you, and you can even have lessons when you're on public transport or something like that on your phone. So there's lots of convenience about technology in education, and please remember to back up your assertions here with concrete examples. And so mention that you're now able, thanks to technology, to have a lesson while you're on the train. You can actually talk about an experience which you had when you were learning to do something when certainly many years ago you wouldn't have been able to unless you used a book. But yeah, certainly convenience would be a good thing to talk about with technology. Another possibility, another thing you can talk about is how it's now available for a much wider audience. Knowledge is now available to a much wider audience, and so perhaps a lot of people who wouldn't have been able to get access to these lessons, they're now able to, thanks to their computer. And so you can say that this has made education free and accessible to a lot of people. So this would obviously be another plus for technology being used to educate. And I've given concrete examples of people, perhaps people living in foreign countries where they don't have access to native speaker teachers. I would talk about that because obviously that's an experience from my life. And I think it's much easier to think of concrete examples if you think of experiences from your life. Not necessarily about you, but experiences from your life. Then you need to mention some points against, and you might think that because I work using technology in education, you might think I won't be able to think of any reasons against, but of course I can, and there are things against using technology. I'm actually not very happy when, for example, kids just watch TV shows in the lesson, unless it's learning a foreign language and they're watching the TV show in that language. Then I can understand. But I think it's strange when teachers on the last day of term, perhaps they let the kids watch some TV show, and I don't think they learn that much when they're doing this. So there are lots of reasons against using technology, but to make it concrete, I would say that sometimes pupils and students depend on the technology too much. So it's like with a calculator. I would use this concrete example. If a student only uses a calculator and never practices their multiplication tables in their head, you will find that they don't remember their multiplication tables and they depend on the calculator to get the right answers. I think nowadays when you look at adults, lots of adults have forgotten their multiplication tables because they use their phone or they use something else to do the calculation. So this is one reason against using technology. It can actually be a hindrance, an obstacle to making people remember things, making people learn things for themselves because they depend on technology. A second reason against technology, let me remind myself because I had a little think about this earlier. Also information itself becomes a little bit more diluted thanks to the internet. So for example, it could be hard to find, it will be easy to find information about something, but it's harder to find correct information or reliable information about something because there's a lot of stuff out there which perhaps has the incorrect answer, and still, because the internet's free and available for everybody and anybody can write something on there, there's a lot, you sometimes have to kind of look hard to find the correct information. So this is another disadvantage of technology in education. With your introduction, you should just pose the question. So re-pose the question. Don't use the same words as appear in the actual exam, because if you repeat their words, that's not going to look impressive. If you repose the question with your own words, and give a tiny bit of background and maybe even indicate the direction your essay will take, what exactly you're going to discuss in the main body, that's perfect for the introduction. It shouldn't be more than a couple of sentences. It really shouldn't. So that should be quite clear and simple. If I were going to do it for this one, I would say something like, technology is a feature of most classrooms in the modern world. This essay examines the benefits and the drawbacks of using gadgets and devices as tools of education. So something like that for the introduction. And the conclusion should just, firstly, it must answer the question. It really must. I've lost count of the number of essays I've marked where the conclusion doesn't answer the question which they've been asked. Make it very clear and answer the question so that the person marking your work immediately sees, yes, they have answered the question. Great, you've fulfilled that, you've achieved, you've done what the task has asked you to do. And your conclusion should really follow from the preceding arguments. So I would just repeat and say, on the one hand, technology has made, and I would balance actually in the conclusion, but you don't have to. You can come down and make a decision. You need to give your opinion here. So I actually think that technology is, it does have pluses and minuses. It does have benefits and drawbacks. And so I would say the benefits are that it's now accessible for all, and it's very convenient to use. So you can actually learn at a lot of times when you wouldn't have been able to in the past. However, on the other hand, it's now a lot harder to find the information you need, just because there's a lot of rubbish out there and you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet. And secondly, people depend on technology, and so they're not so capable of thinking or analysing problems for themselves. So that's what I would conclude with. Now, some tips. Obviously, make sure you use balance, but also use linking words. This should be a highly structured essay, and I mean this structure, yeah? And to link these ideas together, you really ought to use linking words which explain, like therefore, since, due, but there are many, many others, thanks to, owing to, because of. If you want to know more about those linking words, please click on the link up here if I remember to put it here, because I've got 2 other videos on these particular linking words and how you use them. Also, make sure you use linking words of contrast, of comparison, of addition, and giving examples. And so these are just examples of all these linking words. I'm not going to say too much about them in this lesson because I've got 2 other lessons that already go into them. They go through them in detail. Secondly, use some impersonal expressions, especially if you are playing devil's advocate, and they sound nice. It's often said that it could be argued that there's a widely held opinion that there are those who claim that it's a nice impersonal expression for the other side of the argument, and it shows that you can use your passive, so it's quite a complex grammatical construction. And that's another thing, do use a range of grammar and a range of vocabulary. I mean, sounds obvious, but sometimes you don't see many grammatical devices being used, and so do use past modals or conditionals, and they can often be used in set expressions like this, so be aware of them. There are a lot of good expressions online, again, you can find for introduction and conclusion, a lot of good words that you can use, and I've put a couple here to sum up, to summarize in conclusion. Some more tips. Be clear, no waste. What I mean is, I often see unclear sentences where I'm not sure exactly what the writer, what the author means, and sometimes you see sentences which are a bit of a waste. They're maybe irrelevant to the question, or maybe they just don't add anything to the essay. So don't waste sentences. You've only got 250 words, or maybe 300. That's only like 15 sentences, maybe 18 sentences. It's not many when you've got a big topic like the benefits and drawbacks of technology. There's actually a lot you could say about that, and with most of the IELTS for and against questions, they're very open questions and there are arguments on both sides. So be clear, don't waste any sentences, use them for your reasons for and against and for your concrete examples, very important concrete examples. Secondly, another point, use appropriate vocab. So yeah, use firstly, secondly, thirdly to split up your essay, but if your essay is about the environment, make sure that the vocabulary is typical environment vocabulary. There are a lot of words you could use there. If you want to see different topics for different vocabulary for different topics, check out my vocabulary videos, because I've got one on environment, but I've also got one on have I got one on I don't have one on technology, but I've got ones on crime, on family, on appearance, on different topics. So use appropriate vocab. Also use good collocations, things like I strongly object to, I highly recommend, it's highly probable. All of these are nice adverb collocations, and again I've got a lot of videos on adverb collocations, so please study those and use them in the writing. I've also written here, not to be forgotten, use the internet. There's a great website which I'm going to link to below called IELTS.net, I think, but anyway, I've been using it for ages. I send all my IELTS students to this website because it's got great vocabulary for part 1 and part 2, part 1 academic, part 1 general. It's got loads of these kind of expressions. It also has some exercises for practicing linking words, and it has hundreds of model answers, so kind of perfect answers, the way you really should write an answer for and against essay. Loads and loads and loads and lots of useful vocabulary for doing this writing, so please use this website. I'm going to link to it below. I'm going to put a lot of links there because it's hard to find all of the really useful pages. There are so many, so please use the internet. And lastly, common mistakes, which I see, by the way, in all of my in all the IELTS essays I get, or FCE essays, articles is usually the main problem, and it's quite strange because when people speak they don't make so many mistakes with articles, but when they write they often do. So make sure you're confident with your articles and do revise the rules before you try and do your essay. Prepositions as well. Again, I've got a lot of videos on prepositions, so please follow them, but also look at IELTS Writing 1, because there's good prepositions with describing changes and trends, and you may well need to do so in this second part, describe a change, so make sure you know that vocab too. Thirdly, irrelevant arguments. I've mentioned this. Don't waste time. Don't speak. Focus on the question. Make sure every sentence is focused on that question and offering something in the way of reasons for concrete examples or reasons against concrete examples in the main body. The other two parts, really, you're reposing the question and you're reposing your conclusions, which you've already reached here. So make it all relevant, and yeah, sometimes there's inappropriate vocab. There are problems with collocations, that kind of thing. So revise your collocations, especially set expressions which are good for the writing exam, and you can use the internet to do that. Okay, thanks for watching today's lesson. If you've got any questions about this exam, write them under the video, and I hope to see you all soon.